Hey there, friends. Another video I'm not sure I'm going to post, but I wanted to explore a little bit more of this 9-card reading that I did in my most recent video, using an attempt to find evidence for an initial impulse, and see how accurate I get. So what I'm going to do is actually, I guess here's a warning if you're not interested in hearing anything political, as I do from time to time. I'm going to read about the new healthcare bill and where things are in the Senate right now after it's passed the House. So let's see how this goes. I choose these kinds of things partly because they're in the news and I can check my work later and see how, how close I was. All right, let me see all out. That a little bit. I'm trying to find a setup to make videos where I have an actual table to work on rather than the leg of my couch, and I haven't had good luck yet. This is as close as I've gotten. And I'm always working from the side, but oh well. How are we doing? All right, we're doing okay. All right, well, the first thing I could see at the beginning, with the Fool at the end of the last row, really immediately made me go, nobody knows where they're going right now. So in essence, I could probably stop the reading. But I'm gonna go ahead and see what I can see. Starting with the Three of Wands in the middle, this is our key, and this will support it. So the theme of our reading is, interestingly, growth, expansion, and there's some passion behind it. There's definitely some fire in it, because of course we're dealing with the Suit of Wands. With threes, we have two becoming one. So there's this sort of pull, which suggests a certain amount of strands from different versions of this bill being culled into one. So overall, there's a huge path of sort of not culmination, of sort of strands of things coming together. So it seems to suggest that the version that was passed by the Congress this week is not the ultimate version, because different elements are going to have to come into play, and there'll be a certain amount of collaboration, for better or worse. Interestingly, if we just look at this row, I haven't even gotten to this card yet. We've got all this fire, so we've got all this wands, which suggests there's going to be a lot of work done on this. But everything is like it's just all battle. You know what I mean? Like, it's all crossed batons. It's all crossed, not swords. But, in a way, you almost want to see swords here, because swords would suggest intellectual argument. You know what I mean? It would suggest communication and, like, intellectual battle. This just looks like battle. This just looks like people, like, banging their, they keep talking about this term. They keep using the term on NPR lately, saber rattling. And you sort of get that sense with this row, without even looking at the meaning of the cards. Crossed batons, like, and then the, like, fray of this is intense. So that's interesting, and I'll come back to that. But so we're looking at this expansion, this growth, these things sort of coming into one, and then we've got, like, emotional upheaval. There's going to be emotional conflict. So there's going to be a lot of fighting, essentially, which I think goes without saying. The appearance of cups, especially the Three of Cups at the bottom, makes me hope that there'll be more emotional reasoning included. You know what I mean? That emotion will come more into play than it has so far. So, that's an interesting thing. But we have, like, this sort of, there's going to be a lot of work around it. There's going to be a lot of, like, wrangling, and there's going to be a lot of heat and fire underneath it, but it's going to be upsetting. That doesn't necessarily bode well at this point. Now, the question that was asked was, what's the energy around the bill in the Senate, not what is going to happen to it, or where are we going. So the energy around it is that it's going to be a battle, and it's going to be upsetting. Now, the key is to sort of look for more evidence to support whether that's true. So just like in the last one, I'm going to go through the rows and then the columns, or really down, and see, if anything kind of ignites a reevaluation of my initial thesis or supports my initial thesis. So we start with the Five of Cups again, and then we get into the 9, right? No, that's the 8. Sorry. The 8 of Cups and the Fool. So from emotional upheaval, from, like, conflict, again, this does give me hope that there will be more empathy involved in the process, because this is work. This is, like, putting in emotional work. But the row ends again with the Fool, and so what we get is this, we have, like, emotional upheaval, we've got a lot of, like, exhausting work, and then we still don't know where we're going at the end of it. So that doesn't necessarily support the thesis necessarily, other than that it's probably too early to tell much of where things are going. The Fool is going into the future. He's looking off this way. He's actually actively walking off this way. In fact, all of the people in the card are looking toward the future, but we've literally got they're not looking at anything. You know what I mean? So that's, the energy around it is probably still too undeveloped. And I can't help but think about this row as suggesting all of this, like, emotional ensnarement, and at the end of it, you still don't have a clearer sense of where you're going. And what we do have, the Fool seems to just be carrying this baggage with him. So that's not, it's not a clear sign, but it does sort of support the idea that there's going to be a lot of work and upset, around it. And at the end of that, things may not be much clearer than they are now. The other thing that's interesting is that the balance of cups and wands, if I look elementally, we've got fire and water, which are really adversarial in a lot of degrees. And so there's going to be, can emotion put out the fire of the like upset, or will that just will they combust? Will they create steam that sort of fuels even more of it? It's an interesting thing. So the first row definitely suggests more of a sense of work, exhausting emotional work, again, upset, and at the end of that, sort of not really having a clear path forward. So it doesn't negate the initial thesis. It just sort of suggests a different layer of that. Now, when we look at the second row, we've got the 2 of Wands, the 3 of Wands, and the 10 of Wands. That's somewhat worrisome because we jump from early to late. We jump from beginning to completion, and sort of the Fool is resting on this completion. Which suggests that when things come to a completion, we won't have a full picture of what we're really working with. It also suggests kind of like cutting out the whole middle, you know what I mean? So we go from, initial sort of impulse to growth to we're done. So that again is an interesting picture. I've already talked about the kind of feeling of crossed, energy in battle there. And how there's no swords. There's no swords at all. So there's no thinking going on right now. It's just fire and water. It's like energy, passion, and enthusiasm. So the deficit of swords, which is the only suit that doesn't make an appearance here, suggests that there's not a lot of clear thinking going on. There's a lot of instinct and a lot of passion. There's a lot of emotion. There's not a lot of intellect at play, which is not, again, not a good sign. So if I look at this just sort of in terms of its numerological meanings, we've got, the initial coupling growing into something and then exploding towards its completion. And it's hard not to look at this. The suit of Wands is not a suit I traditionally associate with conflict, but it just feels conflicted here. And in fact, even just sort of looking at the arabesques on the cards, we go from sort of flowering florid to a little bit less. So as things get further along, the ability to kind of grow and flower seems less. And the kind of like the cage match increases. Again, I think sort of supporting this overall theme, which I came up with, which was like there's going to be growth and emotional upset. Definitely we get the upset here. We also get growth in the 10 as it reaches completion, but what we don't get a whole sense of how it's going to get there. It doesn't seem like it's going to go the whole path. It's going to like combust somehow. And then we look at the last row. We've got the King of Wands, we've got the 3 of Cups, and we've got the Knight of Coins. And again, sort of this initial energy of like everyone's looking to the future, everyone's looking, but we don't have any cards that are sort of giving us a sense of what comes next. So I would say, there's a sense of the unknown. I think everyone's sort of, I would say the energy around this is, again, conflict and temperament, and not so much anyone really knowing what the path forward looks like. Looking at the final row, we do have a leader who is sort of a fiery, type, but who is looking at sort of the emotional consequences, the emotional growth of the situation. So someone or someone's in a position of power does have their eye on the consequences, the emotional consequences of what's happening. But we also have someone who's chasing money, if we look at the Knight of Pentacles. So, and the money, so this follows. So we've got like the money looking off, so it goes from this to this to this. Like, it would be nice if the knight came at the beginning and the king, you know what I mean? But that's not there. So like, there's like maturity in the foundation and the consequence of emotional, or the emotional potential there, like how this can become an emotional issue. But at the end of the day, it's like the more immature, less developed desire to chase money ends our foundational row. So not surprising, but also not necessarily a great sign. So as was the case with my last example of this row doesn't necessarily support the thesis either. It just sort of adds more color to it. It doesn't seem to negate the original thesis, though. So now let's look at the columns. So we start with column 1, and we've got the 5 of Cups, the 2 of Wands, and the King of Wands. So we definitely have more fire and water energy, as we do all but the last column. Emotional upset does lead to a coming together and a mature response. So that's good, you know what I mean? That suggests this sort of corner energy of the king feels like the foundation is resting on someone who is mature, although impulsive. But the flow downward does feel like upset, irrational kind of upheaval turns into a coming together, a unity, and then a maturity. That's a good thing. Ish, right? Because the King of Wands is not our most mature king, he's not the most practical. But, when you're dealing with politics, it's hard to look at the coins or the pentacles as a suit of practicality and not just see money. I could contradict myself and say the knight is chasing practicality, which includes money. So the financial influence could be as important as just the practicality of getting this done. But it's hard to say. In my case, I'm not that good a reader that I can kind of tell the difference. I tend to, when I coach people, to sort of trust their instincts. And my initial instinct was he's chasing money. In fact, he's fantasizing about it. So column 2, we go from the 8 of Cups to the 3 of Wands to the 3 of Cups. So we have 2 3s. That's interesting. So growth, coming together, uniting, different strands coming into one thing, both passionately and emotionally. A lot of work, a lot of emotional work, a lot of effort. And I would say, effort around the emotional consequences of this leads to a certain amount of coming together, a certain amount of growing, and certainly the 3 of Wands grows into the 3 of Cups. The growth on the 3 of Cups is much more florid than here. Between the 2 cups, we do have fire, and we do have like this crossing. So, you could say that in the Marseille, all the wands are crossed, and they are. But energetically, it does feel like this blocks blocks this, at least to a degree. You know what I mean? And for the water to flow downward, it sort of flows. Water flows through fire and back into water, which could be a good thing because the water sort of tempers the fire and still comes down intact. So they temper each other, which may suggest, that with a little bit of work, and a little bit of coming together over this, that the craziness of this sort of becomes more temperate. Then we look at the last column, and we've got the Fool, the Ten of Wands, and the Knight of Coins. The Fool to me is usually a really good card, but not in a situation where you need people to be reasoned and educated and thoughtful, because the Fool isn't any of those things. The Fool is impulsive and thoughtless, and uneducated. And he's going into some really, heavy lifting, without a lot of experience, and he's racing to the finish line. And knights are impulsive. So like the tendency toward impulse, in this reading, is concerning, right? Because there's not too much energy given to, again, like I said before, the absence of swords in this case makes you feel like, boy, I wish there was some air energy. I wish there was some thought going into here, because we have people who are who without fully thinking are running to the finish line. And again, with a root of the impulsive knights. And again, we end with money, you know what I mean? We end with the sort of knight chasing the coins. So to come back to my original question, which is what's the energy around this in the Senate right now? Overall, I think the reading does support the initial thesis, which is that there's a coming together around it, but there's battle around it, and it's going to be emotionally upsetting. And the rest of this seems to suggest reasons why. The good signs are that there's balance, to a degree, between the Fool up here and the King down here. But the punctuation mark of this guy chasing money, just sort of, we're talking about American politics. It's hard to take money out of the equation, and it's also hard to not assume that that's going to be a factor in the playing, right? The other thing, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, it occurred to me that all the cards in this reading are male, on the surface. Now, I don't generally read the court cards by gender, but, we get reports early on of how the Senate committee, evaluating the congressional plan, are all men. That, these are the kinds of things I look for in a reading to support whether my thesis has any validity in reality. And if I look for evidence in the world reflected in this reading, then, I've got, the only people in this card are men. They're all looking to the future, but two of them are looking without anything in front of them. The only one who's looking at the emotional consequence, seems to turn into someone who, at the end of the day, is chasing the money. The only earth balance is that card. There's no other coins or pentacles. There's no swords, so there's not a lot of thinking right now. It's a time where the energy is very emotionally reactive. There's a lot of boiling and steam, which is what fire and water create together. And there's not a whole lot to temper it, except for this middle path. So, hopefully there's a moderating influence. This may suggest that there's a moderating influence at work, which could temper a lot of this fire and water energy, which is fairly balanced because there's 3 and 3. So hopefully one won't ignite won't evaporate. Well, hopefully the fire won't evaporate the water, and the water won't put out the fire. You know what I mean? But at this point, it feels like the Fool reminds us that it's too early to know. For example, everyone's looking at the future, but there's no cards that really give us a future. And overall, it's really extreme in many ways right now. Major arcana cards can be moderating influences, but in this case, the moderating influence is about as inexperienced as possible. Coins can be moderating influence, but there's not many of them, and the only one is an impulsive chaser. Because knights are impulsive and they chase things, they hunt for things. If this were a Rider-Waite-Smith deck, I would say that the Knight of Pentacles could be a moderating influence, because though he is impulsive, he's the least impulsive. So to a degree, there is a grounding influence there. And the card does end with an earth element, so there is a moderating influence in that way. It's just you kind of hope for a more moderate influence. So overall, just to sort of answer the initial question, what's the energy again? It's contentious, it's passionate, it's emotional, it's a bit unfocused, it's steamy, it's boiling, it's bubbly. There's not a lot of thinking going on. There's a lot of acting and reacting. And right now everyone's looking forward to uncertainty. So that's what we got. But the reading, the rows and the columns do seem to support that. Overall, the energy is a bit diffuse in one way, and in another, it's pretty intense. There's not a lot of moderating influence. So that is that. Again, this is mostly interesting to me as a way of kind of exploring and practicing and validating and sort of looking at the world in ways that I can sort of verify later. So I hope this was interesting, and have a great week.